What up, Razzballers? Good evening. Welcome into a bonus pod of the Razzball Fantasy Football YouTube channel. We're going to cut the pleasantries tonight, folks. Bob and I are jumping on real quick. I am your host, Sky Guasco, joined by the captain of the mothership here, Bobby Lamarco. This is day one of free agency, and folks, it has been hot fire since the beginning. The last couple of seasons, we all kind of anticipate this day in the fantasy industry, and there's a couple big names. There's a few bombs and shakes the league, and then we kind of trickle it out over a week. Not this year, folks. We've had 90% of our big names already landed, already moved teams, a couple other big nuggets out there at large over the next couple of days, which we'll get into as they drop. But today, Monday, has been massive. We're going to get right into it. You can find everything Razzball, of course, at Razzball NFL on Twitter. You can find myself, Sky Guasco, on Twitter, and Bobby Lamarco as well. We're going to save the pleasantries. Bob, I'm going to start hot fire, my man. As an analyst, you're a professional. You leave your emotions at the door. That's why I love you. As a football fan, as a New Jersey kid, obviously you're a Giants guy. Everybody can see you behind you. Quick feelings on Saquon Barkley moving not only to another team, but in division to the bitter rival Philadelphia Eagles. We'll start off with Saquon Barkley.
Well, yeah, I think from my first reaction, it's good for Saquon. You got paid, got your money, went to a better team. I am super excited to talk about how much Daniel Jones sucks. About week 4, week 5, when he's throwing to half of Darren Waller with a bum hamstring, and Darius Slayton, a former 5th-round pick, is his number 1 option on the outside, and Wan'Dale Robinson plays 2, maybe 3 quarters before getting hurt. Jalen Hyatt's just running sprints down the sideline, and he's handing the ball off to Devin Singletary. And honestly, I can't wait to talk about how shitty Daniel Jones is behind the bottom offensive line and those skill position groups, because the Giants really, like, honestly, nothing tells me that you're invested in a franchise quarterback like getting rid of all of his best players and not investing into him at all. You know what? Let's trade a 2nd and a 5th for Brian Burns. You know what? I'll tell you this. I'm going to tell you this. The best part is, Brian Burns, great player. I can't wait till Brian Daboll gets fired because Daniel Jones sucks. And I'm going to laugh because it's going to be hilarious that Brian Burns is having a great season. He's got 10 sacks. Yeah, that's super cool. But Daniel Jones is trash, and he's throwing to trash receivers and a running back who had a career year, who, by the way, had a better career year without you, Brian Daboll. So why did you go get him? He's better without you. But it's fine. Let Saquon Barkley walk. Don't go get a receiver. Don't trade a 2nd to go get T. Higgins, who wants out of Cincy. Don't do that. Instead, let's get a defensive end, beef up that defense, and win every game 10-7, and you'll get fired when you're 7-10. I'm excited. Back to you, Sky. What's your thoughts about Saquon Barkley?
Ooh, my man, that might be all we have for you tonight. Bob, hot fire. I love that. Jamie's feeling it in the chat. Loving how you're feeling. Visceral reaction, folks. That's how the fans are feeling. Saquon Barkley, 3 years, $37.75 million, basically $38 million over 3 years to go to the Philadelphia Eagles. Huge patch for them. We're going to get to the rest of our running backs in a little bit, but maybe the top prize, depending in NFL terms at least, it all starts with the quarterback. We know that. Kirk Cousins, coming off of a torn Achilles, had an incredible year up until the injury. We had talked about him in a previous episode. QB7 on the season in points per game. Justin Jefferson was a top wide receiver, obviously. Addison and Hawkinson and Jefferson were all top 10 at their respective positions while playing with Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins QB7 in his own right. He moves on to the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta Falcons have had a tough quarterback situation since Matt Ryan retired. 4 years, $180 million. I think this is great across the board for the Atlanta weapons. Now we have a great offense going on there with the steady quarterback. Thoughts on Kirk Cousins?
Well, I think the first thing that stands out, I think it's a downgrade for Cousins. Obviously, if you're going from Justin Jefferson, who's the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy football and probably in general, to Drake London, who's I think is good, and I think this is great news for him, great news for Kyle Pitts, but a downgrade for Kirk Cousins as a fantasy asset, because not only is he coming off the injury, but we always talk about continuity, knowing the offense, mastering an offense. Now, the good news is Zach Robinson, the OC for the Falcons, he's been connected to the Rams, who, by the way, also had Kevin O'Connell. So there's overlap there. So at least Kirk Cousins is going to a team. And by the way, I'm pretty sure his wife is from there. So the rumor is happy wife, happy life, by the way. So Kirk Cousins says, I'm going to go back to Atlanta. The wife's going to be happy. My game's going to improve just from that alone. So maybe he gets a wife bump. I'm not sure. Not entirely sure. But that being said, from a scheme standpoint, at least Zach Robinson's offense should be relatively close or familiar with Kevin O'Connell. So that's what I like about that. And then outside of that, though, Kirk Cousins, from the injury alone, I'm not going to be probably touching him too much. I don't like the change. I don't like the injury. I don't like the downgrade in weapons. And then Kyle Pitts. Like, Kyle Pitts should, in theory, fill a TJ Hawkinson-esque role for him. And let's see how that works. And I think overall, the pass catchers, Bijan, I think it's all improvement for them as a whole.
Absolutely agree. And again, Kirk Cousins and the Minnesota Vikings over the last handful of years, one of the few offenses that really fed every position for fantasy terms. Dalvin Cook, of course, for many years, dominant. Madison had a couple great seasons and games as well. But Jettas, now Addison, Hawkinson has been great there as well. So we like to see all the Falcons, one of those like, a high tide rises all ships. We're hoping to see that. Maybe a downgrade for Cousins, but an upgrade overall for the Falcons in general. Our good friend Jamie is popping in the chat here, Bob, already seeing an overreaction to Drake London's draft capital going in the middle second round. He was maybe a third, maybe early fourth rounder prior to this news, jumping middle second round. Quick thoughts just kind of on that overreaction and what it might look like. Bijan can't go any higher. He's a consensus top 3 running back right now, but these other wide receivers and potentially Pitts with Jonnu Smith moving on as well. Quick thoughts on what that ADP might look like. And now much better look for dynasty for these younger players as well.
Yeah, I kind of think Jake London now has top 12 upside. I think Kirk Cousins has proven to support top 12 receivers. I know Justin Jefferson's the most recent, and obviously the extreme version of that. He's an elite guy. But at the same time, we saw with Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, plenty of guys that proved like Kirk Cousins is going to come in there. And it's also the offensive change, by the way. Arthur Smith's BS is gone. Zach Robinson should be bringing a Sean McVay-esque offense, heavy 11 personnel, great for wide receivers. Plenty of great wide receivers have been in this offense. So I actually don't mind him, especially even in a dynasty format. The question comes like, Richard's probably going to be updating his trade chart. We'll probably be talking about his updates on Thursday. But to be honest with you, if I'm a win now team, and even if I'm not, like, this is the type of receiver I want to build around. So, like, I would be looking at the Drake London owner and seeing what would it take. I would even invest in trading away a more seasoned guy like Devontae Adams. If I feel like I'm not maybe win now, I could trade Devontae Adams and get a Drake London, take a haircut short term to get that long-term upside. So I don't hate Drake London right now. I think he could definitely be a top 12 guy.
Like that. And the offensive line there in Atlanta is very much improved in the defense too. So Falcons, a team to look out for in the NFC South. Let's move on to Russell Wilson. Disappointing last year in fantasy on the surface, Bob, but when you dive a little bit deeper, Russ was not terrible in a game-to-game basis. They sat him at the end of the year. We talked about that in a previous episode because of contractual stuff, right? But he would have played the whole season, had decent numbers, did have a couple of best seasons in the last 3 or 4 leading out of Seattle, heading to Denver. Sean Payton obviously didn't want anything to do with them. That's kind of a political thing we could talk about another time. But moved to the Pittsburgh Steelers, another team like the Falcons who seem to have talent all over the field, Bob, except for at quarterback. So now they have Russell Wilson. Listen to this. 1-year deal, prove it deal. That's fair. Old veteran, want to make sure he's bouncing back. No big deal. The Steelers are paying him $1.2 million. Now, Bob, that's probably more money than you and I have, right? I'm going to guess without knowing your finances. It's none of my business.
I got it. I'm slightly ahead. You've got
1.4-ish. Okay. $1 million in NFL terms, Bob, is a bag of potato chips. That's unbelievable. On the other side, don't worry, Russ is getting paid $38 million by the Broncos to play for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Gotta love that. How are we feeling about the Steelers overall?
I think this is really one of those situations. Well, first of all, number one, the comp pick that the Denver Broncos will get will be a lot lower now. That's key because they lost Russ. Now, the question is he going to flat? I think with Arthur Smith coming in, this is the best fit for him. Arthur Smith, if you think about him and how he was able to help Ryan Tannehill resurrect his career, Tannehill wasn't dink and dunk. Like, remember his yards per attempt? He was dynamic, throwing the ball down the field with Arthur Smith, with A.J. Brown and Corey Davis at the time. Like, they were pretty good. And I think that's really what he could really excel in an Arthur Smith offense. That being said, I like this for Kenny Pickett. This is a type of quarterback. By the way, if you beat him out, it means something. If you actually are able to go in there and actually compete with Russell Wilson and beat him, it actually gives me more confidence in the Steelers pass catchers. I think it does offer, like Deontay Johnson, by the way, they're talking about trading him, which I don't think makes any sense. At this point, you got the two quarterbacks, maximize the weapon. Don't be the Giants. Don't get rid of all the weapons. Keep some. It's smart. I heard it's a smart thing to do. Look at the San Francisco 49ers. But anyway, but I think it's good for the Steelers as a whole. I think Arthur Smith, we'll see what that really means. Like, can he just go back to keeping things simple like he did with the Titans versus what the hell he was doing with the Falcons? I'm hoping that's the case. But I think it offers a benchmark. I think if Russ wins the job, you could probably be more confident in guys like George Pickens and also Deontay Johnson heading into 2024.
Russ was QB 16 in points per game, Bob, and he had 5 games over 20 fantasy points. All of the Steelers' circus of quarterbacks, nobody was over 11 points per game. Now, a lot of comparisons from Pickens to DK Metcalf. Deontay Johnson's not Tyler Lockett, certainly not JSN anymore, but they could go find that in the draft as well, or maybe pick up another speedster. Marquise Brown is still out there. I like that option and the deep option in the speedster for Russell Wilson. We saw that with Doug Baldwin for years, and DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett too. So I love Pickens. I think that's a huge upgrade. JSN and those kind of guys are not movement parts with Russ anymore. So Cortland Sutton had a huge year last year, and Jerry Jeudy not so much. So I like that for the big body receiver. So I'm certainly upgrading personally. All right, let's move on here to the kind of under the radar, right? This is like a patch fill for now, probably this year. The Raiders have a lot to do to compete with the Chiefs, obviously, in their division, maybe even the Chargers. We'll see what happens with Harbaugh and the boys, and the Broncos. We'll see what they do. But the Raiders have Gardner Minshew coming into town, kind of a career backup at this point, but has popped in when necessary and plays well. Wasn't overwhelming, but he can get the job done. He has some decent weapons there. 2 years, $25 million. I don't think we're excited about Gardner Minshew personally, but is this really or maybe you are, but is this really a downgrade from Aiden O'Connell, Jimmy Garoppolo, the other options they've had with the Raiders with a Devontae Adams and some of those other weapons?
Well, I think what it does give the Raiders the flexibility not to trade up, trade draft assets, to draft a quarterback early. This now gives them an option to say, you know what, Aiden O'Connell versus Gardner Minshew, we can sell that to the fans this offseason and say, if Aiden O'Connell could beat out Gardner Minshew, like Minshew almost took the Colts to the playoffs. He was it was serviceable. We have Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers and Michael Mayer, and we also have, Amir White in the running game. So like I do feel like if Gardner Minshew just outplays Aiden O'Connell, which we should expect he should. If it's close, I think they're going to give the shot to Aiden O'Connell. But if Gardner Minshew wins, by the way, we saw Gardner Minshew. He supported a top 10 wide receiver in Michael Pittman, which is great news for Devontae Adams' fantasy stock, even though they were kind of close to each other overall. But I think it just gives me more confidence in 2024 because you got the Antonio Pierce, got the team buying into Antonio Pierce. And if you just have competent quarterback play, I just think that his PPR upside goes through the roof. I think Jacoby Myers is a little wishy-washy as a wide receiver 3. There wasn't really a second option for the Colts in the passing game necessarily that was consistent week in and week out. Josh Downs did flash some, but I think Minshew overall does seem to feature like one guy. If you lose DJ Chark a few years ago, and then there was Michael Pittman. So I don't think I'm going to be going crazy after anybody else besides Devontae Adams, but I think the offense as a whole definitely gets a bump if he wins the job.
Agreed with that. Let's move on down to the running backs here. We also had Baker Mayfield, who re-signed, so we'll mention him really quickly, but we're not going to dive into him. We've talked to him in a previous episode. 2-year, $115 million back with the Bucs. Let's move on to the running backs. Before I do that, I want to welcome in everybody tonight. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell, leave a comment of your favorite free agent landing spot from today, Monday. Who is your favorite landing spot from today? Leave a comment below. And, of course, you can find us on the podcast as well, the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast, anywhere you listen to your audio. Saquon Barkley, we've already talked about him briefly, Bob. We'll bring it back up quickly here. Moves to the Eagles, 3 years, about $38 million. Last year, Saquon was RB9. I feel like he was a disappointment to a lot of people. He was a top 10 running back in fantasy football. He missed 3.5 games. Not amazing, right? But he, I think, was better than people give him credit for. Now he goes to a team with a lot more assets around him. Does that help him? Will he be able to take those red zone touchdowns DeAndre Swift left on the table for Jalen Hurts? Can Saquon capitalize on those?
Probably not. I mean, listen, I think this is great for the Eagles. It's great. The offensive line is great. But the one thing you got to remember, Kellen Moore's the new OC. We talked about this offseason. Ekeler had a down year with him. Some of that is injury, obviously, but also because Ekeler wasn't as featured as a pass catcher. Barkley will not be as featured as he was with the Giants. He led the team in targets this year because the Giants don't have anybody to pass to. The Eagles don't have that problem. They have A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert. So you're going to lose a little bit in PPR formats. You're not going to get as many targets there. And by the way, when it's goal to go, I know Jason Kelsey's gone, but they're still going to go to Jalen Hurts. So I do love this for his fantasy value, but I am not going to be skyrocketing him. I don't see, like DeAndre Swift last year was the RB19, played 16 games, 229 carries. I think the biggest difference between Swift and Barkley is that there will be no Kenny Gainwell BS anymore. So yeah, I don't think he'll be RB19. He will be a top 10 running back, but I'll probably not draft him in round 1.
In points per game, DeAndre Swift was running back 24, and he had 7 games with under 10 PPR fantasy points, which is hard to do. Saquon Barkley himself obviously did a bit better there. All right, let's move on to Josh Jacobs. This one was really surprising. This one kind of blew my socks a little bit this morning. Now, we did a lot of predictions. I've been handling the running backs this summer. I have my rankings. My updated rankings chart's going to come out the next couple of days once I kind of file everything out here. It's been crazy today, but look out for that on football.razzball.com with all of our free articles. But Josh Jacobs going to the Packers is surprising. I thought maybe that Derrick Henry could go there. They get a similar-ish back, big body, whatever. Josh Jacobs going there. A bigger part of that we'll talk about here in a second. Josh Jacobs go 4 years, $48 million, $12 million per year. Simple math there. Bob, the 4 years, this is the longest contract of anybody today signed outside of Kirk Cousins. You guys know my thoughts on Josh Jacobs. I'll let you take it. Josh Jacobs, 4 years, $48 million for the Green Bay Football Packers.
I mean, them cutting Aaron Jones, man. Like, they're in on Jacobs. I mean, Jones has the opportunity now to go somewhere else to be the guy, which I think is fantastic. By the way, I didn't want Jones to stay. The move seemed odd at the time, but the other thing you got to remember too is there is the John Gruden, the system that Josh Jacobs really grew up in and really, he played pretty well in. I think Josh McDaniels, by the way, was the last 2 years ago was really where he blew up. That was his best season, of course. But his familiarity with that West Coast scheme, I do like it's an emerging offense. I much rather if I'm Josh Jacobs, I'd rather be in this offense than the Raiders. So I do think this is a big time, move for him. The money tells me he will be a workhorse. Now, does AJ Dillon come back on a cheap contract to be the RB2? Maybe, but I do like the role. We've seen Josh Jacobs perform pretty well as a pass catcher too when needed. He's not the greatest pass catcher, but he could do the Aaron Jones stuff. But listen, I still rather have Aaron Jones. So I wonder why they couldn't get $14 million a year or $12 million a year, my apologies, out of Aaron Jones. But still, great landing spot for him. Sky, would you be considering him as a top 24 player this upseason?
Honestly, I mean, you guys know I've been a Jacobs fader annually. I've written 9 articles in the last 3 years about how much I don't like Josh Jacobs. It's his inefficiency, but I'm excited now that he's in a much better offense with Green Bay overall. And we saw what Jordan Love did in the back half of the season and the opportunities that AJ Dillon and the running backs in Green Bay for years have gotten opportunity in the pass game and the rush game. And now with them losing Aaron Jones, which is really surprising, there's all the opportunity there for Josh Jacobs. So I don't know where I'm going to have him land yet, but I'm much more open to the opportunity about drafting him. I don't love him in Dynasty just because of the way I feel about him as a running back, but in redraft this year, he's much more attractive than he's been over the last couple of seasons. So I am like that, but I'm really excited now to see where Aaron Jones lands, to see what he can bring another team looking for another dual threat running back, but age comes into play there. Calvin Brown, Jamie are in the chat here giving us their top free agent landing spots. Make sure you drop those in the comments as well so we can discuss them if we haven't got them to them yet. We are talking right now about the running back section. Let's move on down to Austin Ekeler, one of the later ones to drop today, Bob. Ekeler goes to the Commanders. That's surprising to me. I had, a couple landing spots for him. The Commanders were not on my radar. Really excited about Brian Robinson prior to this. Not so much excited anymore, but they lose Antonio Gibson, who we'll talk about in a second. 2 years, $11 million. Again, another kind of prove it deal there with the Commanders. But Austin Ekeler last year, RB21. He did miss 3 games and then pieces of others. But again, he had that high ankle sprain, massive week 1, wasn't the same after that. Do you think he's going to be bouncing back?
I don't like it. I mean, Cliff Kingsbury, the one thing we talked about a lot with him was that he used bell cows with James Conner, had a bunch of touches. He was getting like crazy workloads, and then even before that, Kenny and Drake came over and he got a workload. So like, this is the downside of loving a player in a situation with a new coaching staff, because you don't know if the coach loves them. You know what I mean? Brian Robinson is not a Dan Quinn or Cliff Kingsbury guy. So this proves that they didn't. Dan Quinn's comments a couple days ago, like, oh man, Brian Robinson loves it. He runs the football hard. Now, granted, they could complement each other pretty well. Brian Robinson could be that grinder, and Austin Ekeler could play more of a pass game role, similar to what they tried to do a few years prior with Cliff Kingsbury with James Conner and Chase Edmonds before Chase Edmonds got hurt. And then also Dan Quinn did in Dallas over with Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard. So there is a world where both these coaches could see a way to get both these guys involved. But at the same time, that kills us for fantasy, especially with a rookie quarterback potentially coming in. Probably a situation to avoid.
That's what I'm nervous about. We saw Ekeler early in his career when he was actually kind of that 1B to Melvin Gordon. Both of those guys for the Chargers were great for fantasy, but we also had Phillip Rivers at the time. Now having a rookie quarterback, most likely a little bit nervous about that. I agree. We did talk about DeAndre Swift just a little bit, but we hadn't really talked about his particular situation. He moves on to the Chicago Bears, 3 years, $24 million. Last year, he was RB24. Bob, we've talked about him already in my running back analysis when I broke it down to where I thought it was going to be with my predictions. 9 times last year, Bob, 9 times he was tackled inside the 1 yard line. Every single time, tush push, Jalen Hurts rushing touchdown. Unbelievable. Like, that's impossible to happen. We talked about Saquon earlier. He moves on to the Chicago Bears now. They had 3 running backs last year, but they've had a lot of injury concerns. Does DeAndre Swift just show up in Chicago and be the automatic number 1? Or is this going to be a horrible committee that might be great for NFL terms, but a mess for fantasy?
Well, Shane Waldron's the new OC there. So Shane Waldron coming from Seattle. There's a very good chance that DeAndre Swift takes over that Kenneth Walker role, and he is the primary ball carrier. And then Roschon Johnson just becomes the Zach Charbonnet
had it first. Trust yourself.
Charbonnet. Whatever. Cabernet, a little fancy wine action over there. But so I think that makes the most sense. Khalil Herbert, unfortunately, I don't know what this actually means. I think he becomes a backup there as well. But Swift, the thing I will say with Swift especially is that he has never been a great pass catcher. Like, he just in the NFL doesn't look like the most fluid pass catcher. And Chicago with Caleb Williams potentially coming in with a new offensive staff, he's probably going to be a dead zone running back, and a lot of us won't be drafting. We'll probably take receivers there, especially because with a lot of uncertainty there in Chicago too. But I do think with Shane Waldron coming in, the Kenneth Walker role probably makes the most sense, which is viable for fantasy. But the question is, how good is that run game going to be with a rookie quarterback?
Bob, 2 questions back to back here. In redraft, would you rather have DeAndre Swift maybe in the RB dead zone or Roschon Johnson with an who knows later in the draft? Same question in Dynasty. In redraft and Dynasty, who would you rather have, DeAndre Swift or Roschon Johnson?
Swift. Don't let the numbers fit. Like, this is Shane Waldron coming in, and they went out and got DeAndre Swift. If they believed in Roschon, they wouldn't pay DeAndre Swift this money. And I'm not saying Roschon's done, but it does seem a little weird. Like, it seems like you're bringing in a rookie quarterback. If Roschon showed you enough last year, like, it's still the same Matt Eberflus. It's still the same GM. So it's not like it's a complete overhaul, like the same thing with the Commanders and that switch. So it is a little weird that Roschon got drafted. They decided that they're going to bring in DeAndre Swift instead. Now, I think Roschon, long term, my problem is like, Caleb Williams being attached to him is great, but then you're waiting probably 3 years for that to kick in. So give me Swift on both.
All right, Jamie's not going to like that. I'll tell you right now.
No.
All right, let's move on to Devin Singletary. You talked about him earlier, replacing now Saquon Barkley with the New York Football Giants. Last year, Devin Singletary came on pretty well down the stretch. He was okay in your fantasy playoffs. Didn't do much prior to that, though, landing him at the RB 40 in points per game in PPR. He's obviously not Saquon Barkley, body type, skill set, whatever. But as of today, he's the starter for the Giants. Are we drafting Devin Singletary?
I freaking said this. I said this 2 weeks ago. I go, yeah, if Saquon Barkley leaves, I could see Brian Daboll going and bring back Devin Singletary as a plan B. Well, it happened. I don't care. This is bullshit. Like, honestly, it is. Like, it's like he's going to be – Daniel Jones is not a heavy pass. Barkley led the team in reception and targets last year with 76. Devin Singletary will probably get you 50 targets, something a little less. You're hoping that the skill position around them gets better. His scoring opportunities will go down. Devin Singletary's best seasons, in Buffalo, he wasn't 870 rushing yards. Whatever. I think I'm not going to be drafting Devin Singletary. I hope the Giants do something. At this point, the line's a mess. The quarterback situation's a mess. No thanks.
We've got 3 more here to round out the running backs, Bob. For sake of time, I'm going to give you 3 names, 3 landing spots, and kind of give me a couple sentences on them, but we don't have to dive as deep on these guys yet. Let's see what happens because I don't think they're going to be the number ones, so we'll see how it flushes out. Tony Pollard goes to the Tennessee Titans. We know King Henry is on the move eventually. We just don't know where yet. Dallas, Baltimore. We'll see what happens. Tony Pollard goes to the Titans, 3 years, $24 million. Antonio Gibson leaves the Commanders, goes to the New England Patriots, 3 years, $11.2 million. And Gus Edwards leaves Baltimore, goes to the Los Angeles Chargers, 2 years, $6.5 million, and reconnects with Greg Roman, who was his original OC there in Baltimore when he showed up. Tony Pollard to the Titans, Antonio Gibson to the Patriots, Gus Edwards to the Chargers.
Yeah, I like the Tony Pollard to the Titans thing, except for the fact that I don't, because I'm a huge Tajay Spears guy. Once again, this is another one of these moments where as much as I wanted to believe in Tajay Spears, this is Brian Callahan's system. Now, there's a chance where Brian Callahan makes Tony Pollard his Joe Mixon, and Tajay Spears takes over that Chase Brown role last year. That was kind of nice for fantasy a little bit. But I think this is Tony Pollard's backfield. I think they went out and got their guy. If they believed in Tajay Spears, follow the numbers. It makes the most sense. Now, we'll see what Will Levis does. DeAndre Hopkins, Traylon Burks, in theory, Chico Kongwu, they have something building there if Will Levis could take a step under Brian Callahan. But the one thing I will say is that Brian Callahan used Joe Mixon as a bell cow. So you got to love that. I know you told me to pick one, but I was going to run through these really quick. Gus Edwards, we talked about this on the show a couple weeks ago. The connection to Greg Roman, the style of running back that Jim Harbaugh and them is the grinder, 2-down guy that they can use like Frank Gore late career. I think that Gus Edwards is a great backup plan if they don't land one of those guys in the draft. I do think they're still going to draft somebody. I don't think Gus Edwards will be the RB1 going into the offseason. But if they get through the draft and they don't use a day 2 pick on a running back, Gus Edwards has shown flashes to be solid. If he gets a bigger workload under Greg Roman again, could be solid. And then Gibson, I think this is interesting because the money's okay. This isn't 24 million like the other guys. I think when you think about the ideal situation is that when you think Alex Van Pelt, you think Cleveland Browns, you think 3 years ago when it was Kareem Hunt / Nick Chubb. It was Nick Chubb was the primary ball carrier. Hunt came in and was basically, they don't have skill position players there, right? So the Patriots have the same problem. So there is a world where Antonio Gibson can become the Kareem Hunt in that offense, be PPR asset, flex guy. Meanwhile, Ramondre Stevenson's the foundational runner, the Nick Chubb. But just keep that in mind when you go into the offseason. If you start hearing buzz, remember, they went out and got Gibson. They inherited Stevenson. So that could be something impactful for fantasy.
Comparing Antonio Gibson out of college to Christian McCaffrey was an absolute laughingstock. However, he was a wide receiver in college. We know that the Patriots in general, with, of course, Bill Belichick, who's no longer there. Love the pass catching running back. We'll see if that continues with Antonio Gibson there in New England. We've got just one wide receiver on the move today, Bob. We've talked about Mike Evans and Michael Pittman already staying with their respective teams. T. Higgins, also franchise tag, has requested a trade. We'll see what happens. He stayed as well. But Gabe Davis, who love him or hate him in fantasy football, but Gabe Davis going to get a fresh start in Jacksonville. I like this a lot for T-Law. We'll see what happens with Calvin Ridley, TBD. But Gabe Davis goes to Jacksonville, 3 years, $39 million. Last year, Gabe Davis was wide receiver 53 in PPR at 9.5, which is almost impossible for a starting wide receiver. Bob, he played these games, but he had 5 games that he played, and he had 0 fantasy points. Impossible. What do we do with Gabe Davis?
I think this is more notable for a guy like Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, because Trevor Lawrence last year, Calvin Ridley probably demands more targets than Gabe Davis, but I think there was something to the role that Calvin Ridley played that they didn't want to pay Calvin Ridley 20 plus million because he's mostly a deep threat. Go just get a specialized player for that. That's Gabe Davis. So they could continue to dink and dunk to Ingram, to Ridley, to Zay Jones. And they have now a guy at 13 million versus paying whatever Ridley was going to get. You know, these guys are now getting close to 30. He's probably close to low 20s, but you go get a specialist that could lift the top off the defense. So I think Gabe Davis, best ball only. I know everyone hates when people say that, but that just means a guy who's high ADOT, low target count. So I'm not going to bother with Gabe Davis in redraft. Dynasty-wise, same thing. I think this is good news for Trevor Lawrence that they're investing in the talent around him. To be honest with you, I think the biggest winner of the group is probably Christian Kirk. I think there's a real chance he could be the number 1 target in receptions and in targets for this team. And on the flip side, in Buffalo, Khalil Shakir, listen, the Buffalo Bills do not look like a team that is going to be spending that much this offseason. They cut a bunch of guys. They're still over the cap as of today. And Khalil Shakir could really emerge as a deeper name. I know everyone knows about Dalton Kincaid, but he can really erupt next year.
They've been moving a lot of guys on defense, but kept everybody on offense except for Gabe Davis. We didn't have any tight ends move. We had a couple guys stay where they're going to be. Hunter Henry re-signs with the Patriots for 3 years. Dalton Schultz re-signs with the Texans for 3 years. Bob, I'm going to rattle off very quickly the at-large players. Ryan Tannehill, Joe Flacco, Sam Darnold at quarterback. Derrick Henry. Aaron Jones becomes a free agent. A.J. Dillon, Zach Moss. Running backs. Wide receivers, Calvin Ridley, Marquise Brown, Curtis Samuel, Odell Beckham Jr., your boy Tyler Boyd, and Darnell Mooney at wide receiver. And tight end Gerald Everett, also at large. Noah Fant also re-signed there as well. Is there one player, Bob, other than maybe Derrick Henry, the obvious one, you're excited to see land in the next day or two?
You know, if it's Calvin Ridley to the Giants or Marquise Brown, I'd be very happy with that.
Somebody,
and then they
go
Giants. Spend them.
Someone,
and then they go spend sixth overall on one of the top 3 receivers, and then they get one of those guys. That's what I'm talking about. But realistically, it's Aaron Jones. If Aaron Jones, I think he's kind of that domino now where it would have been nice if the Giants went like, hey, let's go get Aaron Jones instead. You know, he's
maybe
pretty
they will.
good.
Maybe they will.
No. The running backs, no. Wide receivers, stop it. We have the Jujus out there for wide receivers. Go get them. I would say Aaron Jones to the Dallas Cowboys would be really interesting to me. Reunites with Mike McCarthy would be calling my shot there. But I think Aaron Jones is that big domino to fall amongst the free agent running backs. What do you think, Sky?
I absolutely totally agree. Of course, we're all excited about Derrick Henry, but Marquise Brown, we've talked about him. I think he's a sleeper landing spot. And then good clubhouse guys, Tyler Boyd, Curtis Samuel, Darnell Mooney, up opportunities. And I think Gerald Everett is going to be a nice consolation prize for folks as well. All right, we got through it. That's a lot of names to drop. We're going to be diving deeper into all these players tomorrow on the weekly Quad Box. Make sure to come back for more right here on the Razzball Fantasy Football YouTube show and repurposed on the podcast as well. 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can check us out on the Quad Box. We just want to drop all the information for you tonight. Chew on it. Come back tomorrow evening and catch us and the rest of the guys. For the captain, Bobby Lamarco, I'm your host, Sky Guasco. We'll see you tomorrow at 6 o'clock, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and we are out of here.